5 games into the season, boy, that was fast, and we know something for certain. This defense is much better than a year ago. Just how much? We'll go into that today. Here we go.
You are Locked On Ducks, your daily podcast on the Oregon Ducks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, it is that time once again for Locked On Ducks. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with the Ducks. If you have not already, like, comment, subscribe, rate, review, please, and thank you. Wherever you listen to or watch this show, which today is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon today to get started. So let's talk about Oregon's defense, an often discussed subject in the offseason leading up to a year that is almost halfway done in the regular season. I, for one, am glad we have a bye. I need it to slow down. I like to enjoy things. We talk about the football team for 9 months, and then it's finally here, and now it's just flying by. The Texas Tech game feels like an eon ago. But we can make a definitive statement and conclusion here, and that's that this defense is so much better than last year, which is encouraging on several fronts. Number one, I think players who were in the defense last year have improved. Guys like Jeffrey Bassa. If Brandon Dorlus could get better, I think he has been. Frankly, I think Taki Taimani has taken a huge step forward from what he was a season ago. So last year, Oregon allowed about 27 points per game. Through 5 weeks, they're allowing 11.8. Now I know. Once they play Washington and USC, those numbers are going to go up. A lot of these numbers will. Through 5 games, 153 passing yards a game allowed. That's first in the Pac-12. Last year it was 260 a game. That was good for 7th in the Pac-12. 260 a game. Now, have we played the best passing offenses we've ever seen? No, we have not yet. Though, might I remind you that Colorado's passing attack continues to be one of the most lethal in the entire country, and Oregon completely and utterly shut it down like no one else has been able to. Not Colorado State, not USC, not Nebraska, not TCU. None of those teams have been able to do what Oregon was able to do against Colorado. In fact, they all did the opposite, where Shedeur was throwing it all over the field. Oregon's defense much, much better. Are they going to allow 153 passing yards against Washington or 200 passing yards? No. It'll be more than that because Washington and USC are both able to throw the ball prolifically. And no, I'm not going to sit here and forget about Washington State. However, there were games last year, I think of the Cal game most notably, where Jack Plummer was hitting deep shots and making a bunch of throws early in the game, and we were sitting here going, "What? This guy's an average Power 5 quarterback at best. Why are we getting beat? Why are we not able to do more here?" And then eventually Oregon got in the rhythm in that particular game. But I feel like if this Oregon team played last year's schedule, a number of the games would have looked different. I remember early in the BYU game, for instance, Jaron Hall was slinging it all over the field. Talented quarterback, sure, but he was completing deep passes. He was moving the ball up and down the field. Then the defense adjusted a little bit. I feel like this unit just wouldn't even allow that to happen, certainly at Autzen Stadium. They're allowing 102 rushing yards a game, which is less than last year when they allowed 122. I suspect that number is actually capable of staying in that sort of range. But I think we've got a better linebacking unit. I think the defensive front is significantly improved from a year ago. The overall team speed is outstanding. I mean, this is an Oregon team that has played Texas Tech, that is still going to be probably just over 500 maybe in Big 12. It sucks that Tyler Shuck got hurt, but I think that's still a solid team. That's definitely Oregon's worst performance of the year, by the way. You know what great teams do when they don't play their best game or play their worst game of the season to date? They still win. Oregon was still able to win, and they forced 4 turnovers in that game. Colorado, an explosive offense. Hawaii, a G5 team. Yep, they can move the football. I see other Pac-12 schools struggling with Mountain West teams regularly, including this season. Oregon did not whatsoever. Oregon's allowing 255 yards a game. That's number one in the Pac-12 right now. Number one. So the point that I'm making by bringing up these stats, because I know every single one of these opponents that we've played, and I know that Oregon is going to play better teams this year. But ask yourself this question. Coming into this year, we all wanted to see the defense improve, right? I've long said the pop year might be in 2024 for the defense. In year 3, maybe it's year 2. Early returns are strong, but I definitely expected improvement, and this has been improvement. There is no way to look at it and say, the team hasn't gotten better defense. No, it's better across the board. I think at all 3 levels, they have improved. And through 5 games, if you were to draw up on paper the perfect outcome, the best realistic outcome for Oregon defensively in each of those games, I'd argue that it wouldn't look much different than what we have seen so far. The Texas Tech game, you would have had fewer penalties, and if you had, I think there would have been fewer points allowed. But Texas Tech has got some playmakers. They have, I think the guy's named Dre McCray is a speedster. The game was so long ago, I'd forgotten whatnot. They've got solid running backs, good offensive line. Like, Texas Tech is a respectable team, and I thought Oregon, if they'd played well defensively, would have been 20 to 24 points. And if they'd cut the penalty yards in half, which, by the way, they only had 2 over the weekend against Stanford, that would have been the point total they allowed. It would have been in that sort of range. So that was certainly not a perfect game. That's the only way it could be better. But if you go look at every other game defensively, how could it possibly be better right now? I don't think it could. I do not think that it could. So that begs the question, is it enough? Is it going to be good enough? We are about to find out. We're not going to find out this week because Oregon's got a bye, or as Dan Lanning called it, a work week, which I like that name for sure. But for us, it's going to be a bye. We get to just double up on the Husky hate week and the anticipation for what is going to be the highest ranked matchup in the history of the border war. Whew, boy, I tell you, the stakes on October 14th are going to be gargantuan for so many different reasons. And Oregon is going to find out in that game and against Washington State and then the following week at Utah if the defense has improved enough. It's hard to not feel really good about where they are at right now. But they're about to get a thoroughly strong test. They have been tested in select moments. Texas Tech, that was a test. I think they passed it, not with flying colors. Colorado was probably a bigger test in terms of the caliber of offense you're going up against, and they passed that with the best defensive performance of the Dan Lanning era. I said that at the time, and it certainly looks that way even more after what Colorado did to USC last week, putting up 41 points, including 27 in the second half. Oregon's starting defense has not allowed a touchdown since the third quarter of Texas Tech. The third quarter of Texas Tech of week 2, 3 consecutive weeks, the starters have not allowed a touchdown. You can't ask for more than that right now. As I said last week, bigger tests lie ahead, but man, this is just such an encouraging sign, and it has to make you feel excited as an Oregon fan about what Dan Lanning and Tosh Lupoy and Chris Hampton and all the other defensive coaches, Demetrius Martin in the secondary as well, what they have put together on that side of the ball from a talent acquisition standpoint, a schematic standpoint, and an execution standpoint. All 3 phases, hit through 5 weeks. You absolutely love to see it. I've loved the pressure rate as well, because man, that was bad last year. And the pressure rate on opposing quarterbacks is superb. Is it that much better? Are our eyes deceiving us? No, our eyes are not deceiving us. And your taste buds won't deceive you when you go check out Athletic Brews. So much like Bo Nix was changing the game with a number of big passes, pick either one of his touchdowns to Troy Franklin. I liked his toss to Terrence Ferguson on 4th and 2 personally. Athletic Brewing Company is changing the non-alcoholic beer game. They're making non-alcoholic beers that actually taste good, full flavor, well-crafted, just like a full-strength beer. They're great tasting and award-winning and beat out full-strength beers in global competitions. You can find Athletic Brewing Company's non-alcoholic brews at a store near you or in my refrigerator, but I can't tell you where I live. That'd be a little bit too personal. You can buy them online, though, at athleticbrewing.com. First-time customers can use code LOCKEDON to get 15% off your first online order. That's code LOCKEDON at checkout for 15% off at athleticbrewing.com. Near beer, exclusions and conditions apply. Athletic Brewing Company, fit for all times. I did think about, because I knew I was going to be plugging the Athletic Brews there, having it as my second segment sip beverage, but the tradition is that it's always cold water. Can't break the tradition. I'm a routine sort of guy. Speaking of routine, Oregon has gotten into a great habit over the last few weeks, and that's sacking the quarterback. Last year, I was able to track down a stat in the offseason about Oregon's inability to get after the quarterback, and it was pronounced. And the stats don't always line up with the eye test, one way or the other. You may hear a stat and say, that's not what it looks like. Or you may look at something and then hear a stat and say, wait, no, that can't be right. I'm seeing this be better than what the stats would indicate, which is why I always say stats are a starting point, not an end point. But the pressure rate this year on quarterbacks, the rate at which we are hitting opposing signal callers, is a lot better. How much better? Well, let's dive into that. Let's hop into the mailbag here. YouTube comments or Twitter, always available at Smalls_55 or at Locked On Ducks, DMs and mentions wide open. If you want priority mailbag questions and a chance to more readily communicate with me one-on-one, join the Locked On Ducks subtext community, link in the description wherever you're listening to or watching the show. Not a requirement, just an option. This one from Nick. I'm very happy with the sacks and the pressure. The fact that they aren't getting caught over pursuing is great. What I'm most impressed with is the why. I'm seeing coverage sacks, and that has surprised me. Do you agree? Against Colorado, there were multiple coverage sacks. And I think that the overall ability of our defensive backs to stay glued to their wide receivers has been outstanding across the board. And it better be, because you're going up against some really good passing attacks and some really good receiving cores this season. Washington's probably the best in the country. USC's really, really good. Washington State got a couple of under-the-radar guys and a great quarterback. There are some legit passing attacks that we still have to go up against. Pass the test against Colorado. More tests to come. But I like what I'm seeing in coverage. However, the pressure rate, I think first and foremost, is because the front four is better. I think the second thing is the blitzes have been well timed. And then there have been a number of times in which, the quarterback has had to hold on to the ball for too long, and you're just not able to do that against this Oregon defense. So Oregon through 5 games this year has 18 sacks. They didn't have any against Portland State, who only threw it 20 times and utilized the quick passing game. And they only had, I think, 2 against Hawaii. So of the 3 Power 5 teams they've played, they've surmised, wait for it, 16 of their 18 sacks. 18 sacks through 5 games this year. Do you know how many sacks Oregon had last year? I will give you 3 seconds. Ready? 3, 2, 1. Only you are going to know if you guessed correctly. But the number of sacks Oregon had in 2022 was, drumroll please, 18. So in 5 games, Oregon has matched their sack total from 13 games a year ago. I'd say that's what you might call progress. I'd say the talent they brought in and got back with guys like Dorlus and Popo Amavai to be a better unit getting after the quarterback, I'd say that's going pretty darn well so far. Have they played world-beating offensive lines? No. Texas Tech's, I think, is pretty solid, though. And Colorado's Shedeur Sanders, he wasn't under pressure against USC like he was against the Ducks. He was not. And Oregon so far, week after week, has been excellent getting after the quarterback. And it's a big reason why the defense is playing better. The secondary's faster. They get to the quarterback better. I think the blitzes have been well timed, well schemed, and well executed. And I know that you could say, well, we've only played Stanford and Colorado. We played Stanford and Colorado last year too, and we put up 18 sacks in 13 games. This is just a much different unit up there. We played Eastern Washington a season ago. We played a BYU team that was certainly better than Hawaii this year. But Oregon only had a couple sacks against Hawaii this season, a team that really knows how to throw the football. And I just look at what they have done with the personnel and the scheme, and it's all lining up right now. And you got to credit Lanning and Tosh Lupoy, Chris Hampton, the newcomer in the room. They've all been sharp. Literally as sharp as can be. I am still trying to wrap my head around. It'll end against Washington, of course. No touchdowns allowed since the third quarter of the Texas Tech game. Outstanding. So that's how I feel about the pressure, Nick. Great question. This one from Dave. Hey, Spence, love the show. Appreciate you. Every dayer here. Look at my man. I noticed you've mentioned Josh Pate on the late kick a few times, so I went and listened. Thanks for that, by the way. He has some pretty spot-on takes. Indeed, he does. My question to you is this. Is your man crush on him due to his great takes and college football IQ, or the not too dissimilar hairstyle? Peace. So I do enjoy Pate for several reasons. Number one, I, like him, lament the expansion of the playoff and that it is celebrated by people who fail to fundamentally understand what has always made college football great. And that is that its week-to-week urgency is unlike any other sport. I am recording this show in the middle of Sunday Night Football. The Kansas City Chiefs are playing the Jets, a game that I don't really care about very much. I might tune in later because I really like watching football. But when I tune into that game, the ramifications if the Jets were to upset the Chiefs are about 1/1000th of the ramifications if Alabama had lost to Ole Miss or Mississippi State in either of the last 2 weeks. It does not compare. And as we go to the Big Ten and a 12-team playoff, we are losing tradition that took literally over 100 years to build. We are losing a history of matchups against teams that I know and am familiar with and know their fan bases and everything like that. And yeah, we're going to go play Penn State, and that's awesome. But I don't care about Penn State. I don't have an affinity for them. I didn't watch them play Oregon as a kid growing up once a year. That's what's always made it special. And Pate understands that exceptionally well. The 12-team playoff fundamentally is rooted in money. I remember hearing all the time, and I'm surprised Josh hasn't brought this up yet. I think he maybe has a little bit, but I have heard many a times from the pro-expansion crowd, and Josh has a great line about it. Not all expansionists are casuals, but every casual is an expansionist. And I don't like sports where you're, appealing to the casuals if you don't need to. College football doesn't need to. Doesn't have a popularity problem, doesn't have a television ratings problem, doesn't have a money problem, nothing like that. So the expansion of the playoff is rooted in more money because there's going to be a lot of money available because there's a lot of eyeballs, there's more sponsorships, yada, yada, yada. So people who are pro-expansion say, well, it'll create more parity in the sport. Who's the favorite to win the national championship right now? Georgia? Is that Georgia team that was down by 10 points on the road against an Auburn team that is yet to crack the top 25 this season? That Georgia team? Okay, yeah. What about Texas? Yeah, they beat Alabama, who was in a slugfest with South Florida for a while. Yeah. Okay, really impressive stuff there. Well, what about Washington? Well, they haven't actually played a team that we can say for certain is going to finish with a record above 500. Oh, okay, yeah, that's a good point. The point that I am making here, any one of those teams could win the national championship, by the way. And I put Oregon in that mix. They are capable of it because the parity in college football is unlike anything we have seen before. In a 12-team playoff, you were sold a bill of goods from certain individuals across the media landscape that told you there won't be real competitive parity until you have a 12-team playoff, which is an utterly ridiculous notion. It always was, and this year is proof positive. This is the most wide open year of college football, and there's a 14 playoff. And Alabama didn't go to the playoff last year, and Alabama isn't going to go to the playoff this year because they're not very good. And the SEC is not going to be guaranteed to win the national championship. Contrary to what you might think, the college football playoff is not going to be just dominated by Georgia this year. They were the dominant team last year. They're not nearly the same team this year, though still very good and capable of winning it all. My point is that people like Joel Klatt, who I like and respect, said, you can't have parity. You won't get it until you get a 12-team playoff. I'm calling BS on that because Joel Klatt has also said on his podcast, which I listen to, and is a great listen, by the way. I think he does a fantastic job breaking things down. He talks about how this is the most open it's ever been. There are, 10 teams that could win the national championship. He's got Oregon in the mix, as he should, with how they've looked so far. But guess what? We didn't need the 12-team playoff for that. Nothing lasts as long as you think. Your gambling winning streak on FanDuel won't last as long as you think either. That doesn't mean you should just not do it because guess what? There's a bunch of great offers over there. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $200 in bonus bets, win or lose. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. The app is easy to use, wide range of betting options, including spreads, player props, over-unders, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. You can also bet college football over there. If you think someone's going to make the playoff, go bet it at FanDuel. If you think Oregon's going to beat Washington in 2 weeks, go bet it at FanDuel once the line comes out. I saw it earlier at -3.5 in favor of the Huskies, which seems about right given that the game is in Seattle. If you think that's ridiculous, go bet the Ducks when it comes back online. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. So just continuing on this point as to why I think Pate is excellent. Understanding that college football's urgency is far greater than the NFL, and it's not close. The 12-team playoff cuts against that, and the point of it was supposed to be to create more parity, and here we are in the most paritous league, if that's even a word, the most paritous time in the sport, with the greatest amount of parity in teams that can win the national championship with no clear favorite we've ever seen. Turns out you didn't need to go to a 12-team playoff. You didn't. But people are going to get a bunch more money. So hope they're happy. As our old friend Chip Kelly said, hope you're selling a lot of commercials. Hope you're doing it because you're ruining the sport. It's making it worse. Not something I'm going to leave. I'm not that kind of guy, but is it going to be the same? No, it's absolutely not because losses aren't going to mean as much. Losses in the NFL. 6, 7, 8 loss teams make the playoffs in the NFL. That's despicable in college football. The idea that you could have, it won't be a 6, 7, 8, but you could have 2 or 3 loss teams get in there. Yeah, I hate that. The regular season is the playoff to the whittled down postseason. That's why. Anyway. Also, he has no hair. I do have hair. I just choose not to have very much because it's a pain in the butt. Here's a question from Nathan. Here's another question. The Ducks have a lot of really good juniors who could go pro next year. Birch, Ferguson, Bucky, in addition to the seniors. Don't forget Troy Franklin. He'll be going pro after this year. What spots do you worry about for the Ducks going into next year? I think they'll be fine in the trenches, but I worry about everything else. I don't know about everything else. Like, we have 3 known starters per class between 21 and 23 coming back. Hopefully some of the Terrells, Betchers, and Caspers of the world will be ready. Maybe the question is, who is on our roster who's coming off the bench who will be ready to start next year, aside from obvious ones like Mateo and Tuioti? Don't forget Blake Purchase, too. So Devin Jackson is currently playing a good amount. That's a guy who stands out to me as, if Jamal Hill is, I think, done after this year. Jeffrey Boss will probably be able to come back. I don't think he's a highly touted NFL prospect. So that could be your linebacker duo for next season. I think at the receiver spot, Jurion Dickey and Kyler Casper, those are 2 guys who could definitely see an increased role and be ready for it. I am very high on Kyler Casper and Dickey as well. I think that can be a really dynamic tandem. The defensive line, you said, you felt good about that spot, and I do too. Guys are getting their red shirts in this year. Guys like Mikhail Gardner, Ashton Porter, Amari Washington, Terrence Green. You'll have some more freshmen coming in next season as well. One name that I would watch for, Davey Uli at guard. I could see that. I'm curious what happens at center because Jackson Powers Johnson is PFF's second highest graded center last time I checked, and was the highest graded returning interior offensive lineman in all of college football. Not in the Pac-12, in all of college football. So I don't know if he's going to end up going to the NFL and we have to replace that spot. We'll just have to see. But a couple other names to watch for, Dalen Austin or Roderick Pleasant at corner. I think either of those guys can be ready to play and contribute in 2024. We've seen a little bit of Dalen Austin. Saw him against Portland State, and man, he reminded me a lot of Jaleel Florence in that he's a true freshman. He took the field, and he looked like he belonged immediately. And he's got high level physical traits. So I think those are some names to watch out for. Obviously, we'll have many months to talk about this in the offseason because Oregon's going to lose a healthy number of bodies after this year. But I mean, I've seen glimpses of guys here and there and all over the place that I go, yeah, I feel like we're in good shape. Like Tysheem Johnson, I think, has another year of eligibility. But I mean, look at the safety spot, for instance, or the nickel spot. Like Tysheem Johnson could go back and play safety, and then you could put Cole Martin in at nickel. I mean, how did Cole Martin look in the spring game? Awesome. He's playing a little bit this year. I don't know if he's burning his red shirt or not, but guys like Tyler Turner, Cody DeCambra, safeties from the 23 class, maybe they're ready to take in the role that Evan Williams has got right now. We'll see what happens in the secondary. There are a lot of moving parts, but if you were to ask me about a specific position group, I'd say, yeah, I have an idea of who the guys behind them are going to be once X, Y, or Z player graduates to go on next year. Quarterback will be the biggest question. That's the biggest one. Like running back, tons of talent. We're good. Tight end, I think we're fine. T. Frick probably goes NFL. Herbert, I suspect, comes back. He's got another year, I believe, and I think Kenyon Sadiq is awesome. Receiver, plenty of bodies. Running backs, like I said, we're good. Offensive line, just go down the list. But more an off-season question, but still a warranted one right now. Good thing to talk about during the bye week or the work week, as Dan Lanning calls it. And then Nathan wraps up with this question. In terms of this year, given the outcomes of Texas Tech and Colorado, what are the three toughest Pac-12 games that scare you the most? In order. At Washington is the scariest game on Oregon's schedule. Hosting USC because Caleb Williams can throw the football really well. And then I'm going to go until I see Cam Rising come back with Washington State. And we have two of those games at home. Now, at Utah is an easy answer here, but guess what? Utah's offense without Cam Rising, that's what the kids call it ain't it. Nate Johnson, Bryson Barnes, back and forth. I hope Cam Rising comes back. He's an awesome player, and he's a fun guy to watch. And we might need him to beat another contender a time or two in order to give Oregon a chance, depending on the tiebreakers and such. But if he's not there, Utah just doesn't scare me as much. They are so banged up right now. They're missing the quarterback, tight end, I think one of their offensive linemen. They have a couple defensive injuries, I think, as well. They're super banged up. But if Cam Rising doesn't come back, Washington State scares me more. Washington State's a good football team. We all remember how that game went last year, right? We should have lost. Didn't, thankfully, but should have lost. Thankfully, we got them at Autzen Stadium, but that's a game I said in the offseason multiple times. Biggest trap game on the schedule, because win or lose against Washington, it's a big emotion game. Well, we just had a big emotion game against Colorado and then kind of laid an egg for a quarter and a half against Stanford. Those sorts of things could happen. It'll help being at home. Absolutely. But yeah, I'd say at Washington, USC at home, and then Washington State at home in that order. And I'd swap out Washington State for Utah if Cam Rising's back. Good questions. Keep them coming. Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, go Ducks.